The morning sun rose slowly over the quiet little town. The streets were still damp from last night's rain, and a soft breeze carried the smell of oil and metal from a small auto repair shop at the corner of an old road. Inside, a man in a worn gray shirt wiped his hands with a rag, staring at the engine of an old pickup truck. He wasn't a man who spoke much. Most of the townspeople knew him simply as the mechanic, a single father who worked hard and kept to himself. Every morning he opened his shop before sunrise, fixing whatever came his way, from broken tractors to motorcycles and rusty vans. His hands were strong, his face calm, and his eyes carried a quiet story that no one really knew. He had a daughter, a bright, kind-hearted girl who often came by the garage after school. She'd sit on a stool near the door, doing her homework while her father worked. She loved to watch him move, the steady way he handled tools, the patience in every gesture. He never complained about the long hours or the aching back. He'd simply smile and say, "As long as this place keeps us going, we're doing just fine." People in town liked him, but they also whispered about him. Some said he used to be a soldier. Others said he'd been through something terrible during the war. No one really knew, and he never talked about it. When someone asked, he'd just change the subject or give a small smile that ended the conversation. Life for him was simple. Work, eat, take care of his daughter, and rest. He didn't need much. But that peace was about to be tested in a way no one could have predicted. It started on a quiet Thursday morning. The sky was clear, and he was finishing up a repair when he heard the sound of engines. Not just any engines, but powerful, expensive ones. 2 black sports cars rolled into his lot, their paint shining like mirrors under the sun. The cars looked out of place in front of his small, humble garage. From them stepped 2 men, identical twins. Tall, fit, and dressed in designer suits. The moment they got out, they carried an air of confidence, the kind that came from money and success. People in town had seen their faces on billboards and TV interviews. They were the famous twin CEOs who ran a chain of luxury fitness centers and a combat sports brand. They looked around the small shop, and one of them smirked. "This is it? The best mechanic in town works here." The mechanic just nodded politely. "What seems to be the problem?" One of the twins tossed him the keys. "My car's making a strange noise. Let's see if you can handle something more advanced than a farm truck." Their tone carried mockery, but the mechanic didn't react. He simply caught the keys, opened the hood, and began working. His movements were steady, precise. He didn't rush or show frustration. Meanwhile, the twins leaned against the wall, watching and whispering to each other. "Look at this place," one of them said quietly. "He probably built this shop out of scrap." "Yeah," the other replied. "I bet he's never even driven a car like ours." They laughed under their breath, but the mechanic stayed silent, focusing on the work. His daughter, who was sitting nearby, looked uncomfortable. She didn't like how they were talking to her father. But he gave her a small look, the kind that said, "It's okay. Don't say anything." After a while, the mechanic straightened up and wiped his hands. "You had a cracked belt and some air intake damage. I fixed it. Try it now." The twins got in, started the engine, and were surprised to hear it run smoother than ever. They glanced at each other, a little impressed, but still unwilling to admit it. One of them said, "Guess even small-town guys get lucky sometimes." The mechanic just smiled. "Luck doesn't fix engines, skill does." That answer made one of the twins raise an eyebrow. He wasn't used to being talked to that way, calmly, without fear. He leaned closer. "You sound confident. You ever done anything other than fix cars?" The mechanic shrugged. "I've done a few things." The twin smiled, a hint of challenge in his eyes. "We're hosting a charity event next week. Boxing, mixed martial arts, fitness are all for a good cause. You should stop by. Maybe even try the ring." The mechanic chuckled softly. "I don't think that's my kind of event." "Oh, come on," the other twin joined in. "A man who talks like that must know how to throw a punch. Or are you scared?" The tone wasn't friendly, and it was provoking. They expected him to get angry, to push back. But instead, he looked at them calmly and said, "Fighting doesn't always prove strength." That simple line made them pause for a moment. But then one of them laughed and said, "You sound like a motivational poster." They drove off soon after, leaving behind the sound of laughter and engine noise. The mechanic turned to his daughter, who still looked upset. "Why didn't you say anything to them?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Because some people need noise to feel powerful. Silence scares them more." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she could tell he wasn't angry, just thoughtful. That night, after closing the garage, the mechanic sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The stars were clear above him. He looked at his hands, unscarred, steady, familiar. His mind drifted to old memories he rarely visited anymore. The sound of helicopters, the cold wind of a foreign desert, voices calling his name through static. And then, in silence, he closed his eyes. He had promised himself he'd left that life behind. No more fighting, no more proving anything, just peace. But peace, he knew, never lasted forever. A few days later, posters started appearing around town. Twin Brothers Charity Combat Event, live. They were everywhere, in stores, on poles, even at the diner. The twins were the main stars. The posters showed them posing like professional fighters, surrounded by celebrities and sponsors. In small print at the bottom, it said, "Special Challenge Matches. Anyone can step into the ring to test their courage." When his daughter saw it, she frowned. "Dad, they're mocking you, aren't they?" He didn't answer. He just kept eating his breakfast quietly. But later that day, while fixing a truck, a few local men stopped by the shop. "Hey," one of them said with a grin. "You going to take those rich boys up on their challenge?" "They've been talking about you on social media," said the town's quiet mechanic back down. He looked up from the engine and asked, "Is that so? They even called you a coward," the man continued. "Said you talk big but hide behind tools." The mechanic's daughter overheard that and felt her stomach twist. "That's not true," she said softly. He wiped his hands again, calm as ever. "Let them talk," he said. But that night, after his daughter went to bed, he stayed up. He stood in the small shed behind the garage where he kept some old belongings from his past. A wooden box, a folded flag, and a pair of worn-out gloves. He opened the box slowly. Inside were pictures of his old unit, medals, and a single photo of his wife holding their baby daughter. He sat down and stared at it for a long time. The memory of his wife's voice echoed in his head, gentle but strong. "Promise me you'll never lose your calm no matter what happens." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying," he whispered. The next morning, as he opened the garage, his daughter looked at him curiously. There was something different about his eyes. A quiet resolve. She asked, "Are you going to that event?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Sometimes you don't go to fight. You go to remind people that real strength doesn't need to shout." She didn't know what he meant exactly, but she knew one thing, and when her father spoke that way, he never did it lightly. The week passed quickly. The twins continued promoting their event. They laughed in interviews, showing off their training sessions and bragging about how they'd teach humility to anyone foolish enough to challenge them. The townspeople watched with mixed feelings. Some were excited, others worried. By Friday night, the mechanic was still quiet, focused on work. But when the clock hit 6, he turned off the lights, locked the garage, and said to his daughter, "Let's go for a walk." They walked by the river as the sun went down. He stopped and looked at her. "You know," he said softly, "people see fights as a way to win. But sometimes the fight isn't about the other person. It's about proving to yourself that you still stand for something." She frowned slightly. "What do you stand for?" He smiled. "Respect. For yourself and others, even those who forget what it means." She thought about that as they walked home. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't need to. The next morning, a crowd started forming in the town square. The twins had arrived again. Loud music, fancy cars, and flashing cameras. They were promoting the event, handing out tickets, showing off their gloves. When they saw the mechanic walking by, one of them shouted, "Hey, look who showed up. Ready to prove yourself, old man?" The crowd laughed, but the mechanic just smiled. "You'll see me soon enough," he said calmly and walked away. The twins exchanged a look. For the first time, they weren't sure if he was joking. That night, his daughter found him in the back of the garage again. He was wrapping his hands with old cloth strips, the kind used in training. He looked up and smiled. "Go to sleep," he told her gently. "It's going to be a long week." She didn't argue. She just watched him for a moment. That same quiet, steady man she'd always known. Except this time she sensed something different. Not anger, not pride, just purpose. As the lights dimmed and the town went silent, the only sound left was the soft thud of his fists striking the air. Slow, controlled, measured, the storm was coming. And for the first time in years, the veteran was ready to face it. A morning after his quiet training session, the mechanic opened his garage as usual. To anyone passing by, he looked the same as he always did, calm, focused, and steady. But something had changed deep inside him. His eyes carried that old sharpness again, the kind that came from discipline and experience. He moved with purpose even in the smallest things, tightening bolts, checking engines, cleaning his tools. His daughter noticed it too. She sat nearby with her notebook pretending to study, but her eyes kept drifting toward him. "Dad," she said softly, "you're really going to fight, aren't you?" He paused, then smiled faintly. "I'm going to stand up. That's all." She frowned a little. "You don't have to prove anything to them." He looked at her, his tone calm. "I'm not doing this for them. Sometimes we have to remind people that respect isn't something you buy. It's something you earn." She didn't say anything after that. She knew once her father made up his mind, he wouldn't change it. That same afternoon, a group of people gathered near the garage. They were reporters, camera crews, and event promoters, all sent by the twin brothers' company. One of the twins had told them to stop by the mechanic's place, hoping to stir attention for the upcoming event. A young reporter called out, "Sir, we heard you've been invited to the twin brothers' charity fight. Are the rumors true that you're joining?" The mechanic kept wiping his hands with a rag and said quietly, "I fix cars, not rumors." The crowd chuckled. But the reporter pressed further. "They said you used to be in the military, is that true?" He didn't answer, just kept working. Then one of the cameramen pointed at the signboard above the garage. "This guy runs his whole business alone. No wonder he's so calm. He's got nothing to lose." The mechanic looked up then, his expression unreadable. "I've got more to lose than you think," he said softly. "That's why I stay calm." They didn't understand what he meant, but his tone made them quiet for a moment. The next day, clips of that exchange appeared online. The twins reposted them, laughing about it during a live interview. "He's brave for a small-town guy," one twin said mockingly. "Maybe he'll last a round or two. It'll be good publicity for him. Who knows? Maybe we'll fix up his garage after we knock him down." The audience laughed. They didn't know the man they were talking about. Not really. Meanwhile, back at home, the mechanic began training in secret. Not the way the twins did, with fancy gyms and trainers. His training was simple. Pull-ups on the garage beam, push-ups on cold concrete, long runs before sunrise. His daughter watched sometimes from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. She could see the effort in every movement, the quiet endurance. He didn't train like someone chasing fame or revenge. He trained like someone who had done this before, who understood that true strength didn't come from showing off, but from showing up. At night, when everyone slept, he would stand in the backyard and shadow box under the pale moonlight. His steps were light, his breathing steady. There was no anger in his movements, only precision. Every punch was controlled, measured, like a man who'd learned long ago that control is stronger than rage. The days passed quickly. The posters around town now had his face on them too, the mysterious mechanic who accepted the challenge. The twins had made sure of that. They wanted the publicity. People started talking about it everywhere, in cafes, shops, even at the school. Some said he was foolish for accepting the fight. Others admired him for his courage. One afternoon, as he was closing the garage, a few local men stopped by again. "You sure about this, man? Those twins are trained fighters. You could get hurt." He just smiled. "Pain isn't new to me." They exchanged glances, unsure if he was joking or serious. One of them finally said, "You really think you can beat them?" He looked up at the evening sky for a moment before replying, "It's not about beating anyone. It's about reminding them that the world doesn't revolve around money and fame." That night, his daughter couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching her father's shadow moving in the yard again. The quiet rhythm of his training, the sound of soft punches cutting through the still night air. She wanted to tell him to stop. She wanted to tell him she was scared. But deep down, she knew why he was doing it. He'd never fought for himself. He was doing it to show her, and everyone else, what dignity looks like when it stands against arrogance. The week of the event arrived. The whole town buzzed with excitement. Banners hung on every street and crowds lined up to buy tickets. The twin CEOs had turned it into a full-blown show. Lights, music, celebrities, sponsors. They gave interviews about how they were bringing opportunity to the town, pretending it was all for charity. But people could see through it. The real reason was pride. They wanted to prove their dominance, to make a spectacle of the quiet mechanic who dared to stand up to them. On the morning of the fight, the mechanic stood outside his garage, tightening the straps of an old duffel bag. His daughter stood beside him, looking worried. "You sure you have to go?" she asked softly. He smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I have to go, not to fight them, but to show something worth remembering." She nodded slowly, fighting back tears. "Just come back, okay?" He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Always." They drove to the city arena together. The parking lot was full of luxury cars and expensive motorcycles. Fans in branded shirts shouted the twins' names. Camera lights flashed everywhere. When the mechanic walked in, the noise around him seemed to fade. He moved quietly, carrying his small bag, dressed simply. Old sneakers, a plain shirt, no team, no logo. People stared, whispering, "Is that him? That's the guy who's going to fight the twins?" He looked so normal. The twins, on the other hand, made a grand entrance. Loud music, fireworks, photographers snapping every angle. They were surrounded by bodyguards, trainers, and cheering fans. When they saw the mechanic across the room, one of them grinned and shouted, "Glad you showed up. Hope you brought a first aid kit." The mechanic simply smiled and nodded. "I won't need it." His calmness threw them off for a second. They expected fear, but there was none, just quiet confidence. Before the match started, he sat alone in a small waiting room. The sounds of the crowd echoed faintly through the walls, laughter, chanting, the beat of drums. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Memories flooded in. His old team, the sounds of training grounds, the discipline of early mornings, the quiet moments before a mission. He remembered what his commander once said. "The loudest ones are often the weakest. The strong don't need to shout." He opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "Some lessons never fade," he whispered. Meanwhile, in another room, the twins were being interviewed by reporters. "We're doing this for charity," one said with a smirk. "But we'll give the mechanic a good show. He's brave, we'll give him that," the other added. "We'll make it quick, though. Don't want to hurt him too bad." The crowd laughed and the cameras captured every word. Finally, the time came. The announcer's voice filled the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special exhibition match." In one corner, the undefeated twin CEOs, the pride of the city. And in the other corner, the man who took their challenge, the mechanic from Willow Creek. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half laughing. The mechanic stepped into the ring. He didn't wave, didn't flex, didn't speak. He just nodded respectfully to the referee and waited. The twins entered next, surrounded by their team, flexing and smiling for the cameras. They looked at the mechanic like a pair of lions eyeing a quiet deer. The bell rang. The twins circled him, taunting. "Don't freeze up now, old man," one shouted. The mechanic didn't answer. He watched their movements, their breathing, their rhythm. Years of training kicked in automatically. Every step they took, he saw it before it happened. The first twin threw a quick jab. The mechanic dodged it easily. Another punch came. He leaned back, calm as ever. The crowd gasped when he countered with a single, clean strike that landed squarely on the twin's chest, making him stumble backward. The other twin laughed. "Lucky hit," he said, charging in, but the mechanic's eyes never left his target. He blocked, moved, and struck again. Not hard, but precise. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't wild. It was controlled. The twins started to realize this wasn't going the way they'd expected. The crowd went from laughter to silence. The commentators whispered, "He's reading them. He knows exactly what they'll do." The mechanic didn't chase. He didn't show off. He waited, patient, breathing evenly. Every move he made spoke of years of discipline, not of a fighter, but of a soldier who had mastered control under pressure. By the end of the first round, the twins looked frustrated. They were sweating, breathing heavily, while the mechanic stood calm, hands low, eyes steady. When the bell rang, he quietly returned to his corner and sat down. No coach, no towel, no instructions, just silence. Across the ring, the twins' trainers were shouting, trying to calm them down. Cameras zoomed in on their faces, the arrogance slowly turning into disbelief. And in that moment, the crowd began to see something they hadn't expected. Respect. The mechanic wasn't just surviving. He was teaching them in his own quiet way that real strength didn't need to be loud. The fight wasn't over yet, but something had already changed. The crowd inside the arena had gone strangely quiet. A few minutes ago, everyone had been laughing and shouting, expecting the fee. Had to be a joke. Now the air had changed. The mechanic stood in his corner, calm and steady, while the twin brothers looked uncertain for the first time. They had trained for months with the best coaches, but they hadn't prepared for this. A man who didn't flinch, didn't rush, and didn't seem afraid. The mechanic wasn't fighting with anger. He was fighting with control. Every move had purpose. When the bell rang for the second round, the twins came in faster this time. The first one threw a quick jab toward the mechanic's face, then a strong hook to the side. But the mechanic slipped away with ease, his steps quiet and smooth. He didn't even seem tired. The crowd gasped when he dodged again and again. It wasn't luck. It was skill. The way his eyes tracked their movements, the way his body reacted at the perfect moment. It was like watching someone read a book he had already memorized. The second twin tried to catch him off guard, charging in with a wild punch. The mechanic sidestepped, placing one hand gently on the twin's shoulder to redirect his weight. The move looked effortless, but the twin stumbled forward and fell to one knee. The crowd shouted in surprise. Cameras flashed. From the stands, the mechanic's daughter held her breath. Her hands were clenched tightly around the railing. She had never seen her father like this, so calm, so focused, so powerful without even trying to show it. She remembered how people had laughed at him, calling him weak, calling him old. But now, every eye in that arena was fixed on him. The referee checked on the twin who had fallen. He got back up quickly, embarrassed and angry. "You think you're tough, huh?" he yelled, trying to provoke him. The mechanic said nothing. His silence made it worse for them. It was like fighting a wall that didn't move, didn't speak, didn't care about pride. The fight went on. The twins attacked together, trying to corner him. Their punches came fast and loud, but the mechanic's movements were smoother, small, efficient, like he was saving energy for something else. At one point, the crowd heard him whisper quietly under his breath, "Breathe. Don't rush." He wasn't talking to them. He was reminding himself. And then it happened. One of the twins swung too hard, missed, and left his guard open. In that small moment, the mechanic stepped in, landing a clean body shot that echoed through the arena. It wasn't brutal, but it was sharp and perfectly timed. The twin bent over, gasping for air. The mechanic stepped back immediately, giving him space. He didn't chase, didn't gloat. He just waited. The crowd erupted, some cheering wildly, others too stunned to speak. The commentator's voice cracked through the speakers. "This man, he's not fighting like an amateur. He's fighting like someone who's been through real training. Disciplined, patient, deadly precise." The twins' manager ran to the corner, shouting at them to stay focused. But they were rattled now. They had come to humiliate someone, and instead they were the ones being humbled. In the stands, the daughter felt her eyes water. She wasn't crying because her father was winning. She was crying because she saw who he really was. For years, she had only known him as the quiet mechanic who fixed cars and never got angry. But now she understood why he was always calm, because he had already lived through storms much stronger than this. Back in the ring, the twins regrouped. They stopped talking, stopped showing off. They started taking him seriously. But it was too late. Every time they attacked, the mechanic's defense was unbreakable. His shoulders moved just enough to avoid hits. His hands blocked with perfect timing. The audience began to cheer for him, chanting louder and louder. Even people who had come to see him lose couldn't help but admire his composure. The round ended with another clean counter. One twin's glove slipped from his hand as he stumbled back, dazed. The bell rang. When the referee separated them, the mechanic quietly helped the twin find his corner. He didn't smile or gloat. He just said softly, "Don't fight angry. It blinds you." Those words hit deeper than any punch. The twin just nodded, unable to respond. Between rounds, the twins sat breathing heavily, sweat dripping down their faces. Their coach tried to give instructions, but they weren't listening. Their confidence was gone. They weren't fighting an opponent anymore. They were facing a mirror. The third round began. The mechanic looked across the ring, calm as ever. The twins exchanged a glance. They didn't rush this time. They approached slowly, watching him closely. When they finally moved, the first twin threw a feint, pretending to punch one way but aiming another. It was a trick move. But before his punch could land, The mechanic turned smoothly and used the twins' momentum against him, guiding him to the ropes with a gentle push. The crowd went wild again. Cameras flashed nonstop. The other twin tried to attack while his brother was off balance, but the mechanic spun, ducked under his arm, and landed a quick jab that made him stumble back. Every move he made seemed simple, yet perfect. There was no wasted motion, no showing off. He was in complete control. The announcer shouted over the noise. "The veteran mechanic is showing incredible discipline. This isn't just a fight anymore, it's a masterclass in control." His daughter stood up, clapping, shouting his name with tears in her eyes. For her, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about seeing the strength she had always known in him, finally seen by the world. The twins grew desperate. Their pride couldn't take it. One of them charged recklessly, swinging with all his strength. The mechanic didn't move backward. Instead, he stepped forward and caught the twins' wrist mid-swing. The crowd gasped. For a brief second, everything slowed. The mechanic's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You've got strength," he said quietly, "but no balance." Then, with a simple shift of his weight, he turned the twin around and let him fall safely onto the mat. It wasn't violent. It was graceful. The referee quickly stepped in, signaling a count. The crowd roared. The twins' pride was broken. He got up slowly, breathing hard, and for the first time he lowered his head. The other twin hesitated, unsure whether to continue. He looked across the ring and saw the mechanic standing still, hands down, not ready to attack, just waiting. That look wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to stop. The bell rang again, ending the round. By now, everyone in the arena knew how this story would end. It wasn't going to be about who could punch harder or who had more money. It was about who had heart, and everyone could see who did. As the final round began, the twins didn't rush. They moved slower, more careful. They had learned something, even if they didn't want to admit it yet. They approached him together, trying to find an opening. But the mechanic stayed calm, defending quietly, never showing anger. When he struck, he did so only when necessary, never to hurt, only to teach. The crowd fell silent as he landed one final clean counter. One twin's glove slipped again and he fell backward, hitting the canvas softly. The referee stepped forward and began the count. 1, 2, 3. The fallen twin got to his knees but didn't stand. His brother reached out and helped him up. Both looked at the mechanic, breathing heavily, sweat pouring down their faces. He stood there quietly, not smiling, not taunting, just steady. The referee lifted his hand, announcing the winner. The crowd erupted into cheers, people standing, clapping, shouting his name. But the mechanic didn't raise his hands in victory. He walked toward the twins and extended his arm. They hesitated for a moment, then each took his hand. The cameras captured that moment, 3 men standing together in silence. One of the twins whispered, "Who are you, really?" The mechanic looked at them and said quietly, "Just a man who's been through worse." Then he turned and walked away. His daughter ran down from the stands, pushing through the crowd until she reached him. She threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's over now." Reporters rushed over, shoving microphones in his face. "Sir, how did you beat them? Were you a professional fighter?" He shook his head. "No, I just learned that real power isn't in the fists. It's in patience." That line spread everywhere by morning. Every news outlet replayed it, calling him the silent fighter or the mechanic who taught a lesson. The twins posted a photo the next day, both standing beside him, smiling humbly, their hands on his shoulders. The caption read, "Respect isn't given, it's earned." The fight had changed something in all of them. For the twins, it broke their arrogance. For the crowd, it reminded them that strength can be quiet. And for his daughter, it showed her that her father wasn't just a mechanic. He was a man who lived with honor. That night back home, the garage lights were off. The mechanic sat outside on the porch, looking up at the stars. His daughter sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You didn't just fight them," she said softly. "You changed them." He smiled faintly. "No one changes anyone. Sometimes you just remind them who they used to be before pride got in the way." She nodded quietly, and together they sat there in peace. The sound of crickets in the distance, the smell of oil still faint on his hands, and a quiet sense of dignity in the air. The world had finally seen him. But for him, that didn't matter. He didn't fight for fame or applause. He fought for something far greater, respect, and that was enough. The arena had slowly emptied, leaving only the echo of cheering fans and the low hum of cleaning crews packing up. Yet inside the small locker room, the mechanic was not celebrating. He sat quietly on a wooden bench, his hands resting on his knees, thinking. His daughter had stayed by his side throughout the event, holding his hand as though she didn't want to let go. Now in the silence that followed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. You really did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. He gave her a small, calm smile. "We did it," he corrected. "Together." She tilted her head, confused. "Together?" He looked at her, his gaze softening. "You've been with me every step. You reminded me why I had to stand there. You reminded me that fighting isn't about showing off. It's about showing respect for yourself and for others." She leaned against him, letting her small fingers intertwine with his. She had always known her father was strong, but tonight she realized there was a difference between physical strength and the kind of strength that came from the heart and mind. After a few moments, he stood up and walked toward the twins' dressing room. They had been quiet since the fight ended, sitting on benches, arms crossed, bruised and exhausted. Their faces still carried the faint redness from embarrassment and disbelief. When they saw him approach, one of them scoffed weakly. "What now? You came to gloat?" The mechanic shook his head. "I didn't come to gloat. I came to speak." They exchanged glances. There was no humor in his eyes, only calm authority. The kind of authority that doesn't need to shout. "You wanted to prove something," he said slowly. "Not to me, but to the world. To show that money and power can beat anyone. You thought pride was enough to win, but pride without respect is empty. You fight harder when you understand that every person has value." The twins were silent. For the first time, no words came to fill the space. Their arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by something unfamiliar. Humility. The first twin finally spoke. "And you think we don't understand that now?" The mechanic gave a faint nod. "I think you're starting to. But understanding is not enough. You have to act on it. Treat people well before you need to teach them a lesson in a ring. That's where real strength lives." The second twin looked down at his hands. He was tired, physically, yes, but more than that, emotionally. He had thought he knew what power meant. He had thought a fight like this was just a show of dominance. And yet here stood a man, quiet and simple, teaching them the hardest lesson of all: humility. The mechanic didn't wait for them to respond further. He turned and walked out, his daughter following silently behind. Outside, the night had fallen. The arena lights reflected off the wet pavement, painting the empty streets with pale orange hues. On the way home, they drove in silence. His daughter could feel the weight of the day, the impact of what had just happened. She knew that people would talk for weeks, maybe even months, about what her father had done. But for her, the real story was different. It wasn't the fight. It wasn't the crowd. It was the calm and quiet strength he carried, the kind of strength that didn't need an audience to exist. Back at the garage, he opened the doors and walked inside. The familiar smell of oil, metal, and old wood greeted him like an old friend. He hung his bag carefully, peeled off his gloves, and sat down on a stool, letting out a quiet sigh. His daughter sat beside him. "Did you ever think you'd have to fight like that again?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, I thought that part of my life was over. But sometimes life brings challenges that are unexpected." She studied him. "You didn't even look angry in the ring." "Not once," he smiled faintly. "Anger is easy. Anyone can fight when they are angry. But controlling yourself, that's harder." "That's the test," she nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "So all those years, the things you never talked about, that's what taught you to stay calm?" He looked at her, eyes soft but steady. "Yes, every mistake, every lesson, every battle I faced, it built this. Not for show, not for recognition, for living with honor. That's what matters." The following morning, the twins returned, quietly this time. No flashy cars, no cameras, no music, just them standing outside the garage. They didn't know if he would even see them, but he did. He stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, calm as ever. The first twin swallowed nervously. We wanted to apologize," he said slowly, "for how we acted, for the way we came here and mocked you. We We didn't understand, the mechanic nodded. Apologies are meaningless without change. Actions matter more than words, the second twin spoke next. We want to help, we want to support your work. You've taught us something we didn't expect. We want to make it right. The mechanic's eyes softened slightly. I don't need your help for me. I need it for others. People who deserve a chance. People who don't have a voice. The twins exchanged a look, realizing that he wasn't asking for personal gain. He wanted to create opportunities for others. People who were overlooked, people who were struggling. And that gave them an idea. We can help with that, the first twin said. We have resources, funds, connections. If you want, we can work together. To give people opportunities, teach skills, build something meaningful. The mechanic paused, considering. He looked around at his small garage, the place where he had spent years quietly helping the town, repairing what was broken and teaching what he could. Then he looked at the twins, seeing their sincerity. All right, he said finally. But there's one condition. What's that? The second twin asked. Humility. Everyone who works with me, everyone who joins this, must understand that pride without respect is worthless. That's the only rule, the twins nodded. We can do that, they said together. And so began something unexpected. The mechanic's small garage slowly transformed. The twins helped fund programs to teach young veterans, unemployed youth, and people trying to rebuild their lives. They brought equipment, trainers, and support, but always under his guidance. He insisted on leading by example, patience, respect, discipline. His daughter watched it all, proud beyond words. She saw him teach with the same calm he had shown in the ring. He didn't shout. He didn't push, he guided. And slowly people began to respond. Lives started changing. Skills were learned. Confidence was built. Through it all, the twins learned too. They saw what leadership meant beyond money and status. They learned that respect couldn't be bought or earned through fear. It came from action, patience, and care. One evening as the sun set over the garage, the mechanic sat outside again. His daughter joined him, and together they watched the small group of trainees practicing inside. You know, she said softly, I never knew people could change so much. Not just the twins, but everyone here. He looked at her, his eyes calm. People only change when someone shows them what they're capable of. Not with words, but with example. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about teaching, guiding, and giving people a chance to rise. She smiled, leaning against him. I'm proud of you. Not for the fight, for everything else. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I didn't do it alone. You've always been my reason. And now others can find theirs. Night fell, quiet and peaceful. The garage lights glowed softly, illuminating the faces of people learning, growing, and finding hope. The twins walked past, silent now, carrying equipment and helping where they could, their arrogance replaced with humility. And in that quiet moment, the mechanic understood that the real fight had never been in the ring. The real fight had been to remind people, the twins, his daughter, the town himself, what courage, respect, and strength truly meant. No one in the world had seen him as fully as he had lived this day, but it didn't matter. He had shown enough. He had fought with patience, wisdom, and dignity. That was the kind of victory that lasted far longer than any applause, any headline, or any crowd, and for the first time in a long time, he felt completely at peace. The weeks after the fight passed quietly, yet the world around the mechanic had begun to change in ways he hadn't expected. The news outlets that had once broadcast the story of the silent fighter slowly shifted from covering the spectacle of the fight to reporting on the programs he had started with the twins' help. It wasn't about his victory anymore. It was about the people whose lives were being touched because someone had dared to stand up with calm and dignity. His garage, once just a place for fixing engines, had become a hub of activity. Young men and women came in every day, some veterans trying to find a place after leaving service, others just kids from the neighborhood looking for guidance, a skill, or a chance to be seen. He taught them with patience, showing them that mastery wasn't just about strength or speed, but about discipline, thought, and respect. The twins were there too, but differently than before. They didn't dominate or boast. They helped quietly, listening, learning, and slowly understanding the lessons they had been taught in the ring. The first time one of them showed genuine patience with a struggling trainee, the mechanic had noticed, a small nod of approval passing between them. Real change takes time, and he saw it unfolding before his eyes. His daughter often helped as well. She would hand out tools, watch people learn, or sometimes just sit quietly and smile, seeing her father guide others with the same care he had always given her. She had learned something important from him, that true courage doesn't always make headlines and true strength isn't always visible. One afternoon, as he was teaching a small group how to carefully dismantle and rebuild a car engine, the twins watched from the doorway. The first twin spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I never realized strength can be like this. Quiet, patient, and still powerful." The mechanic looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yes, power without control is dangerous. Power with purpose is what changes lives." The second twin added, "You've shown us something we couldn't have learned anywhere else. Not in gyms, not in fights, not in business. This is real." He smiled faintly, returning to the work at hand. "Then show it through action. Words are easy. Doing is what counts." Life slowly returned to a rhythm that felt natural. The townspeople, once skeptical of the twins' involvement and the attention the mechanic had received, began to see the positive results. Kids who had never thought they could learn mechanics or discipline were now building skills and confidence. Veterans who had felt forgotten were now valued, working alongside the twins and others to rebuild not just cars, but themselves. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with warm hues, the mechanic and his daughter sat on the garage steps, watching a small group of trainees practice techniques outside. The sound of laughter, tools clanging, and light conversation filled the air. It was a far cry from the roar of the crowd in the arena, yet somehow it felt louder in its meaning. "Dad," she said softly, leaning against him, "do you ever think about the fight?" He paused, thinking. "Sometimes. Not because of winning or losing, but because it reminded everyone, and including me, what matters. That calm, respect, and patience are stronger than anger or pride." She smiled faintly. "And you taught them all that. Even the twins," he chuckled softly. "I didn't teach anyone anything. I just showed them what they couldn't see for themselves. People can learn only when they're ready." The next day, a local journalist came to the garage. She wanted to interview him, not about the fight, but about the programs and how he was changing lives. She asked questions about what motivated him, how he managed to remain calm, and what lessons he had learned. He spoke simply, naturally, without embellishment. "I've had a life full of challenges. I've seen things most people can't imagine. But the truth is, the most important battles aren't fought in arenas. They're fought every day, in how we treat others, how we guide the next generation, and how we live with integrity. That's where real strength lies." Her notes were filled with his words, but she sensed that the quiet tone, the calm authority, and the simple wisdom could not be captured fully on paper. Those who met him in person understood immediately why people respected him so deeply. Meanwhile, the twins had fully embraced their new roles. They weren't seeking attention or praise anymore. They spent time mentoring, learning from him and the other veterans. Slowly, they became part of the community, not as outsiders, not as celebrities, but as helpers. People still remembered their arrogance in the ring, but now they remembered their humility and willingness to change. One afternoon, the mechanic's daughter asked him a question she had been thinking about for weeks. "Dad, do you ever miss the old life? The one before we had this peace?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Sometimes, but the truth is I don't need that life anymore. I fought my battles, survived my storms, and now I get to help others weather theirs. That is more important than any fight or mission I've ever faced." She nodded, understanding for the first time the depth of his journey. Her father had faced challenges far greater than a fight in an arena, yet